Tal Lopez.
Here in my garage, just bought this new Lamborghini here.
Yes, that Tal Lopez has just been accused of the SEC of running a massive e-commerce Ponzi scheme. I know, you're shocked, aren't you? Well, a lot of people aren't going to be surprised by these charges because Tal Lopez has his fair share of critics. And a lot of those critics accuse him of being a little bit scammy. So in this video, I want to break down what exactly he's being accused of doing, what was going on with these e-commerce companies, and how this might play out. By the way, if you're new here at Ecom Crew, we investigate the largest e-commerce companies and marketplaces and peel back the BS. So if that sounds good to you, make sure you hit like and subscribe. Okay, so let me pull up one of the news reports from CBS just detailing exactly what is going on here. So the owners of Radio Shack, Pier 1 Imports, and other brands are accused of running a $112 million Ponzi scheme. So first things first, if you're not aware, Tal Lopez, yes, in my garage, Tal Lopez, he was basically raising a bunch of money to buy all these old legacy retail brands that were going bankrupt.
What about Radio Shack? How much did you pay to buy Radio Shack?
That one's private, it's undisclosed, but yeah, that one we own with a billionaire guy.
So the two most famous ones were Pier 1 Imports and Radio Shack, but they had also bought a bunch of other of these big bankrupt brands. No, they did not buy Toys R Us though. So reading the actual accusation, so let me read something from the actual charges here. The SEC accuses Lopez and some of his co-conspirators of making material misrepresentations to hundreds of investors about the bankrupt retailers they had acquired. For example, to entice individuals to invest in their acquisitions, they said their portfolio companies were on fire and that cash flow is strong. And they also told prospective backers that the money raised for a company would only be used for that specific firm. So the SEC goes on to say that contrary to these representations, while some of retailer brands generated revenue, none generated any profits. They go on to say that consequently, in order to pay interest, dividends, and maturing note payments, defendants resorted to using a combination of loans from outside lenders, merchant cash advances, money raised from new and existing investors, and transfers from other portfolio companies to cover obligations. So it sounds like what Tal Lopez was basically doing was he would raise money from people like Dave and say, hey, we're going to take your money and go buy Radio Shack, but he'd actually take that money and go buy other things not stated to me. Now, this might sound a little bit familiar because there's another famous internet celebrity who also was being accused of doing the same thing. And in fact, that guy is sitting in jail right now. And that person is Sam Bankman-Fried. So Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF, was accused of diverting billions of dollars from FTX customers into Alameda Research, his trading firm, without customers' knowledge or consent. So basically what Sam Bankman-Fried was doing was he was taking money from FTX customers and putting it into Alameda and investing that money there. Now, it turns out he was actually doing pretty well in investing his money and making a pretty decent return on that money. But taking customers' funds and misallocating it like that is a big no-no. And that's what Tal Lopez is being accused of doing as well. Now, there's a couple much more scammy things about this whole allegations that the SEC is making. Let me read some of that out to you. So the SEC alleges that at least $5.9 million of returns paid to investors were actually Ponzi-like payments funded by other investors as opposed to the company's profits. So it sounds like what he's being accused of doing is they would take $6 million from Dave's money and say, hey, we're going to buy Radio Shack with it, but they'd actually pay it out to investors. And yeah, if he was doing that, that is essentially a Ponzi scheme. And again, things get a little bit more scandalous if we go on to read the CBS News report. Additionally, the federal regulatory agency claims that Mayer and Lopez allocated $16 million worth of investments for their own use. So basically, Tal is being accused of putting aside a bunch of money for his own personal use. Who knows? Maybe it was to take private jet flights or go out on lavish dinners. Who knows? But apparently he had put aside a bunch of money for his own personal use. Okay, so at first you might have a little bit of sympathy for Tal. You're thinking, hey, okay, well maybe Tal was just taking some of this money that he was saying to buy Radio Shack and he was actually buying Pier 1 Imports with it. And Dave, as an investor, he would still get equity in these this portfolio company and all these brands. And hey, you know what? If these e-commerce brands that he's buying, and actually they're not e-commerce brands, what he was doing, he was buying brick and mortar retailers and repackaging them into e-commerce brands. But hey, maybe if he was actually succeeding in this business model and turning all these brands around and making a killing with it, well, who really cares if Dave was told he was buying Radio Shack, but really he was buying Pier 1 imports. Okay, so that's what Tal's being accused of. Let's examine what this company was that Tal was operating. So yeah, Tal was buying a bunch of old legacy brick and mortar retail brands, and basically what he was trying to do is repackage these up and relaunch them as e-commerce D2C companies. So I think anyone listening here who is an e-commerce entrepreneur probably smelt a little bit of a problem with his business plan. So e-commerce right now, drop shippers and people reselling other people's brands, that hasn't really worked in a long time. The most successful D2C companies out there right now, the Ridge Wallets of the world, the Vessies of the world, they're succeeding because they sell their own branded products. They're not succeeding by selling other brands' products. So Tal's plan to relaunch these brick and mortar retail stores, these e-commerce stores, had major flaws in that business plan.
The one thing is, you can take all our brands and put them on Amazon.
Basically, they were taking one flawed business plan of running a retail brick and mortar store and relaunching it with another flawed business plan of running an e-commerce company selling other people's branded products. And if we take a look at how Rev Brands was doing, Rev Brands was the holdco for all of these brands, guess what? They weren't doing well. So in 2024, Rev Brands basically toyed with going bankrupt and eventually sold their assets off to another set of investors. And I'm not really sure who those other investors were, if they were Tal Lopez and his friends and family and his other kind of backers, or if it was a totally separate group. Not really clear. But either way, basically Rev Group, the company that was buying all these other brands, they flirted with bankruptcy and eventually sold off to another group of investors. So what's going to happen to Tal? Well, that's a good question. Like I mentioned, Sam Bankman-Fried was accused of doing something very similar to Tal and possibly even less nefarious, and he's currently sitting in a jail cell. It seems the way a lot of times these cases go is if it gets enough publicity, the person ends up serving a lot more time than if it doesn't get a lot of publicity. So the fact that Tal Lopez is a very recognizable name probably does not bode well for him. If you evaluate it just on the severity of the crime though, I guess a lot of the devil is going to be in the details about how this whole quote unquote scheme was operating. I know a lot of people, when they initially heard of Tal doing this years ago, buying up all these bankrupt brands, a lot of people were very, very suspicious. I myself put myself in that camp who is a little bit suspicious about what he was doing. So I was suspicious, number one, because I'm a little bit suspicious of Tal. I was also suspicious because the overall business plan did not seem to be viable. And so if you're in this camp of being very suspicious of Tal to begin with, you probably think that, hey, this was all one massive Ponzi scheme to begin. And then if you're on the other side and you're kind of a sympathizer with Tal, well, you might be thinking, well, you know what? Sure, it sounds like he didn't really disclose how some of these funds were being used, but his intentions were good at the end of the day. So we'll let the courts decide what exactly happens to Tal, but you as a listener and a watcher, what do you think? Was it a massive Ponzi scheme? Were you suspicious from the get-go, or do you think this was more a technicality than anything? Let me know in the comments section down below, and until the next one, happy selling.